it's Drybear. We have finally finished our run of trying to get a lot of groundwork done for the leveling area of Path of Exile 2, and we're finishing off with the Poison Ranger leveling build. Now, I'll tell you that the Poison build for Ranger was actually so much more confusing than I thought it was going to be, mainly because the way Poison is implemented is actually different for spellcasters and the application of the poison versus martial classes that apply poison through attacks. And after a ton of testing and retesting, I can tell you that the way that poison works for martial classes like Ranger, if you're applying it through an attack skill from a bow, for example, it actually functions a lot more like bleed, in that it's not necessarily a chaos damage over time dot that you can scale with spells and things like that. It actually is a ailment that deals damage over time, and the size of the ailment is related to the attack that applied the poison, which means that you're not wanting to build chaos damage or go for pure dot. You actually do want to make sure you're dealing enough damage with the initial hit so that you can actually scale that poison, which also means that critical strikes, physical damage, bow damage, attack damage, all these damage scalars that normally wouldn't apply to the dot are actually incredibly effective, because while the dots themselves cannot crit, if the initial hit that applies the dot does crit, it will make the poison much bigger. And so we are going to be running a lot more physical damage, attack damage, skill duration, and critical strike chance and critical strike damage scaling, because we're able to apply much larger magnitudes of poison, which will then be scaled even more when we apply magnitude of poison through the dot build overall. And so while it may seem kind of counterintuitive the way we're going to build this Poison Ranger, we are going to build for pretty much raw power and critical strike, and then scale in whatever poison magnitude, poison duration that we can do to make sure that that poison is even more effective, but we have to make sure we start with a very strong base. So essentially we're going to be running with Poison Burst Arrow along with Vine Arrow while leveling, and then once we unlock the toxic growths along with the actual gas arrow, everything starts to kick into high gear because we're able to use the toxic growth to explode. What's fun about the toxic growths is not only do they deal damage on hit, the impact itself can critically strike as well, but when they explode, they actually deal weapon damage, which is kind of bizarre. I thought they would do like chaos damage or poison damage, but they actually are a weapon themselves, and they apply weapon damage, which means if you have fire damage on attack or whatever your weapon currently has, the explosion of the pustules on the ground from toxic growth applies directly to the explosion relative to your weapon, which is just crazy, which means you can get some insane burst damage. You can see we just popped an essence here and blew it right up because we stacked some pustules on the ground. We use gas arrow to build up and detonate the pustules because they do need to stack some poison damage, and then we use the poison burst arrow on single target. And it also means that armor shred is very good for this because we are doing primarily physical damage with our direct shots. If the target has less armor, they take more physical damage, which means that initial hit that applies the poison is going to do more damage, which means the poison is going to do more damage. So all of these things work together. So you basically are playing a bursty physical damage weapon-based character, and all of your dot-based, plague effects are going to be related to how much damage you're dealing, and we're going to build for that in mind. Which also means boss battles are super fun too, because you can not only deal good dot damage and direct damage, but you can set up traps. Like you can get a whole bunch of pustules on the ground, cause them to detonate, and they'll blow up at once, and they do direct attack damage as well, scaling off everything. And what's great about Gas Arrow is that while Gas Arrow is passively going on in the environment, every time you shoot out the pustules, they will immediately fill up with poison and explode, dealing ridiculous damage. Of course, this is Drybear video, so we have a handy dandy one sheet going over the build itself, and we'll talk through the skill tree as well as the skills, support gems, and the gear you want to do to rotate through this, as well as the overall, like how the skills interact and what your rotation will be. And for the people that prefer to have a full calculator list built out here for it, I have it up on Mobalytics. Go ahead and give it a favorite if you do like the build. And of course, if you were looking for this or the one sheet, I'll have that link down below in the comments and in the description. Now let's talk about the build in general. There's actually a lot of really cool tools here, and I also think that all of my leveling builds have had some very strict restrictions on them for good reason, right? We don't use uniques in any of the builds. We don't put any of the skills above 2 socket or 2 slot, just because I want to make sure that the builds are easy to get to. They don't require you to be on your second character. They don't require you to be in a trade league. And if they're not good enough to work with these restrictions, then I don't think they're good enough to be leveling builds in general. So like that's the restriction there. But what's cool about these is obviously there's a whole bunch of poison options for the Ranger that you can pick up through uniques. And also when you start getting 3, 4, and 5 sockets on these abilities, they're going to start doing ridiculous things together because there are multiple different support gems you would want to run on each one of these abilities. But by limiting ourselves to 2, it kind of gives us a little bit more of a structure. Now, I did a whole bunch of testing on this because poison for Marshall, it just didn't seem to add up that poison damage based on chaos, curses, and application through like witch and spells is actually different than how it applies through martial skills and direct attacks. And it was driving me crazy. So we just went through a whole bunch of different tests, figuring out exactly what was happening and why this was happening overall. And the takeaway is that poison is essentially like bleed for martial classes. Based on the size of the hit that applies the bleed or the poison, that is the size of the poison you will get. It is affected by things like skill duration. It is affected by things like attack damage, projectile damage, because obviously the initial damage of the hit will go up. And surprisingly enough, the poison dot damage is variable as well. It has a little bit of a range to it. It's not like the chaos damage over time dots that you get from Witch that are the same dot based on spell power every time. They actually do vary based on, as a percentage of the main hit. Another thing to note about this is unlike the spells for Witch, chaos damage actually does not scale martial-based poisons at all. This stat, chaos damage, will do 0 for a poison ranger build, so you have to keep that in mind. But again, skill duration does. So skill effect duration is super good, and we'll talk about that when we get to the skill tree. There's some really easy skill duration you can pick up here in the tree that will make the dots even better. And so we basically want to go through a dual-pronged approach of getting as much upfront damage, direct damage as we can, and then get as much magnitude for the poison, duration for the poison that we can, to combine those together to make crazy damage happen. So let's talk about the build progression overall. At level 1, you can start out with Bowshot. I actually liked running Envenom and Execute with Bowshot. Again, we are going to be scaling poison. Getting a chance to poison on the melee hit or on the projectile hit is perfectly good. This will give you a great scaler early on as long as you're keeping up with your bow. And I like Execute on this because I found that most of the time when I was single targeting from levels 1 to like 20, you would end up just like getting them down to low HP. Like you would poison them with Poison Burst, and then you would hit them like once or twice with regular shot, and then Poison Burst, and then regular shot and Poison Burst. And this seemed to be fine as long as the Poison Burst dot was ticking. And so I like Execute because it helps you finish off bosses that may be low or rares that are down below like 30%, and you just want to finish them off that way. Then you'll unlock the Vine Arrow, and Vine Arrow is very useful, but it actually gets outscaled a little bit towards mid-game by things like Toxic Growth and Gas Arrow. But this one's super nice because you can put it on the ground, and then any poison that happens near it will be applied to the vines, and they will slow targets as well. This gives you a nice little damage amp while you're leveling. I found myself not using it once we got to Act 2 and beyond, and once we unlock our Ascendancy, but it does have some good scaling to it, and it is decently good to use. And of course, if you want to crowd control, it's really nice. I like running Scattershot on this one just because there is only one vine can be afflicted on one target at a time. So if you put down 3 of these and there's only one target, it's not going to be 3 vines. However, there is a target limit per vine. So if you get a big pack of mobs, I like having Scattershot on it because it means that this will guarantee hit the entire pack if there's 3 of them. And then I also run Encumbrance just to help slow and keep people in the gas or keep people in the damage as well. Also, while you're leveling, if you really, really wanted to, you could, the Gas Arrow comes online 4 levels later, or maybe even like 8 levels later than Gas Grenade from Crossbow. So if you wanted to, you could run a Crossbow in your offhand, run Gas Grenade as a secondary ability to replace Gas Arrow until you unlock it at level 22. Once you have that, then I think Gas Arrow makes more sense because there's no weapon swap involved. It's much easier just to stay on one weapon and use Gas Arrow this way. But again, you can run Gas Grenade from Marshall if you really wanted to. So if we go over here, so if we go to Crossbow, you can see that Gas Grenade shows up at level 5. So that should be level 14, I believe. So you should be able to get this very easily at level 14, pick up Gas Grenade, and then level 22, you'll be able to get Gas Arrow, which will be a big bump up for you. So you can use that while leveling if you wanted to. Then once you get Toxic Growth, Toxic Growth, when I first started using this, I thought was one of the worst abilities for Poison Ranger in general. Mainly because of the hop back, but also because it's so incredibly slow. I thought it was so bad, and I messed around with it a bunch. My chat kept yelling, he's, no, it's good, I swear, I swear. And I kept messing with it, and it turns out that it actually is very strong, but there's some things that you want to know about the Toxic Growth that are very important. First of all, the impact deals damage. It is weapon damage, and this impact can critically strike. When these detonate on their own, they do weapon damage as well. It's not a direct poison, though when they detonate like this, they will apply a very short, small value poison that's pretty much irrelevant. You don't have to worry about it too much. However, if you put them down and fill them with poison and they explode, they will do double damage, and they do double weapon damage as well in a big area. So normally, if you have just regular, you can have these and they spread out pretty far, and you can actually control, like, you can shoot it close to you, you can shoot it very far away, and you can control where they spawn. But if you run concentrated effect, you can actually get these to spawn in a much tighter cluster, which means this becomes a very viable option for single target. You can get these all on top of a boss, especially if there's a unique boss that has a very large hitbox. You can put this on top of them, and since every single one of these is double weapon damage, and you're getting 8 of them, 7 or 8 of them every single time on the target, it does ridiculous burst on single target, which is very nice. Then you want to run a little bit of attack speed as well. This is multiplicative attack speed, so it's not going to be like a massive increase. But every little percent matters for this, because again, even if you take this off and you have this, you can see how unbelievably slow. You don't have iframes during this flip. You're very slow. You can even run momentum on this if you really wanted to, but personally for me it feels better with attack speed, and I would even run with like some attack speed here, and we can even go up here to the monk side and get skill speed, attack speed, and skill speed. All of that makes it way easier, and you can even get skill speed here and skill speed there. If you were to get all of the Pathfinder stats here, plus the skill speed, plus all the attack speed in the ranger area, these flips are become very manageable, and then your damage gets really strong. And they're stackable too. You can go to a whole bunch in one area, and if the, like, you know, it just keeps popping and popping, as long as you have enough speed and defense to keep stacking these up, you can do ridiculous damage to a target. And I like popping these with gas grenade as well. If you are not, you don't have gas grenade yet, you can still use Toxic Growth, and then you can detonate them with Poison Burst. The only thing I don't like about doing this is you have to kind of nerf the damage of Poison Burst. Like, you could do Scattershot Pierce on Poison Burst so that it goes through targets and triggers as many of the Toxic Growths as you can. Honestly, before you get Toxic Growth, I would just use like Poison Burst and your arrow, and then Vine, and put like vines on the ground. I don't think it's worth using Toxic Growth until you can actually use gas to fill them up easily and cause them to pop regularly, because sometimes you miss them, sometimes the impact kills the mobs before they even blow up. It really is something that's more of like a Act 2, Act 3 cruel kind of thing, versus like if you're in Act 1 or early Act 2, I wouldn't worry too much about it until you have ways to do it. I think the gas is just such a nice synergy for that as well. And we're also going to run with Corrosion and Armor Explosion on the gas, which means that it will shred armor while they're in the gas, and it also will explode when they fully break. And then we're also going to run Exploit Weakness on the Poison Burst. Remember, Poison Burst, the damage of the dot of the poison is related to the initial hit. So if we get bonus damage on consuming fully broken armor, the dot will be stronger and the hit will be stronger, giving us damage in like a double dip kind of sense, because we get to stack that up. Next, I love adding in the Plague Bearer. This one's great because you do so much poison damage in this that it fills up to a lot of poison damage, and then you can activate Plague Nova, which will do poison damage in an area, and you should be able to fill this regularly multiple times through one encounter just by dumping out the extra poison there. And then on top of that, we do run Barrage. Don't worry about actually getting frenzy charges. If you really wanted to, you could run Combat Frenzy and you could get frenzy charges that way by pinning or something like that, or you could even use Critical Mark if you wanted to. I don't think it's necessary. I think the default repeating 2 times is good enough, and you just kind of use it when it's available. It's just a free skill slot to make this better. Keep in mind that Barrage only works on the actual direct martial skills, so it's not like you can pop up Barrage and then Toxic Growth. It's not going to add anything to that, but it will work for Poison Burst, which means you can shoot multiple Poison Bursts in a row with this, which is great for building up poison or just dealing direct damage to a target to burn down a boss, and then you go back to your rotation. And because you have such a you know, combined rotation of everything you're trying to do, having a barrage every now and then on your poison burst is perfectly fine. You can even put it down on gas arrow if you wanted to, just to get a little extra gas out there and help shred armor and things like that. But I think it's just an easy addition that doesn't require frenzy charges. If you wanted to build into frenzy charges mid-game or towards the end of Cruel, you certainly could. I just don't think it's necessary for this. Okay, let's talk about the passive skill tree, because again, there's going to be some odd things in here that I probably need to explain just to make sure that things make sense. There are a lot of great nodes for dealing direct physical damage in the Ranger tree. There are also a lot of great nodes for dealing damage with poison, and you have to kind of manage how you're going to deal these damages and how you're going to balance these out. For example, there are some great magnitude of poison here. There's magnitude of poison here with +1 poison. There's definitely some great poison nodes up here with magnitude as well as +1 poison. There's a lot of really great nodes for that, but keep in mind that when you critically strike, it will make the poison bigger, and when you increase attack damage, projectile damage, physical damage, all of those will make the poison bigger as well, because it's based on the initial hit that gets it. My personal favorite, especially while leveling, is to come down this way, pick up all of these projectile damage nodes. I like getting 1 or 2, like 1 strength and 1 intelligence just for the support gems along here. Then we come over and we grab all this projectile damage here. If you want to, you can get heavy ammunition. I'm going to recommend against it just because the reduced attack speed is going to make it harder to use Toxic Growth. 8% is actually quite a lot for a very long skill like Toxic Growth. And then like coming down here, and then you get all this attack damage that also does skill effect duration. So this makes the initial hit bigger with attack damage, but also makes the poison from Poison Burst longer, which means it does more damage. So it, instead of doing 40% of the initial hit as poison damage over time, it'll do like 80% just because of the increased skill effect duration here once all the calculations are done. Then you can pop over here and get crit chance, and then a 80% multiplicative modifier on your crit chance if you haven't crit recently, which will happen a lot. So in the last 4 seconds, if you haven't crit, you get a bunch of multiplicative scalar on your crit, which will give you, you know, it'll go from maybe 5% crit to like 12% crit or 13% crit, which is very big while you're leveling. And again, if Poison Burst crits and you have skill effect duration, it means that if you take this path at the very beginning, your Poison Burst is going to carry you all throughout Act 1. It'll kill all the bosses for you because it'll occasionally crit doing a bunch of poison damage. You'll stack a bunch of direct damage. You'll have skill effect duration. All of this just makes the leveling super easy. Then from there, you have a couple choices on where you want to go. You can either head up and focus more on crit. You can get some crit damage bonus here. You can come up and get even more crit damage bonus here. And then I would go into the Monk starter area, which has not only crit chance plus damage if you've crit, as well as crit chance and crit damage, but more importantly, it has skill speed, attack speed, skill speed. All of those put together is going to make your Toxic Growth way faster, which means you can keep dumping that big explosion, and Toxic Growth is still your biggest bang for your buck because it does so much burst damage in one go. There's no, like, there's a theoretical limit to how many pustules you can put on the ground, but you're not really going to reach it unless you have a lot of skill speed. And you can get attack damage and crit chance here as well, which is really a really nice synergy that you can pick up in this early area. You can come up here and there's more crit chance and crit damage to get up there as well, which will make your poison dots better. However, you have another option too if you wanted to go more into poison. Picking up magnitude of poison here with these 2 nodes or these 3 nodes is very, very good. Like these 4 nodes here, since we're right next to it, are very strong. You can even get poison duration if you like. And then you can head down this way and you can pick up even more magnitude, poison duration, additional poison. You can get poison duration, chance to poison on hit, skill effect duration, poison duration, and chance to poison on hit. All of these are super strong for that. So you can probably just grab all those. You can get the crit nodes here, the crit nodes here, attack and duration, projectile damage, poison mag. This, I think, will have a more smoother experience in general, but I think this probably has the highest burst potential for bosses if you want to go over into this side. Then from there, that'll pretty much put you into Cruel once you've gathered all of those nodes, and you have a couple options on where you want to go. There will be more viable options here, like getting poison, which isn't too far away from what we were already doing in the first place. There's more nodes here for magnitude and increased effective of poison on a target that's not poisoned is very strong. Low tolerance is a great node to pick up. You can even come over here and get attack damage, and crit chance for attacks, plus attack damage on bosses. It's going to make all of that better. But I like going up here as well to pick up these nodes here for magnitude of poison, plus poisons, all of those. And if you go for these nodes, these nodes, these nodes, these nodes as well, you'll probably be, nearing the Atlas anyway, and you'll be good to go. So you're kind of just mixing in projectile damage, attack damage, critical strike chance, and critical strike damage to make the initial hit bigger, which will then in consequence make the poison bigger as well. Then getting a skill effect duration for poison burst whenever you can. Picking up magnitude of poison is most important. Then getting duration and +1 poisons is very strong as well, and putting all that together. And this one will just blow right through the campaign and get you straight to mapping an Atlas. There is a chance that this is incredibly good at endgame, but again, without testing it myself, I'm not entirely sure. You'll have to mess around with how this would transform as far as like a build goes, and then obviously when you go into endgame, that's when you're going to start needing a lot more percent-based defensive options for survivability. So a lot of these damage options will have to be considered against survivability as you push into maps that are going to start one-shotting you. Next is the Ascendancy. I think a very easy choice here is to come up and get magnitude of poison and damaging spreads to others. Getting contagious contamination makes this so easy for leveling. You could just put down a plague bearer, or you can throw out a single gas arrow and this will spread, especially if you get some big poisons from poison burst arrow that will spread to targets as well. And it's just whatever is the highest magnitude poison on the target, that one will spread. Technically, a target can always have multiple poisons on them. However, by default, without modifications, only the highest magnitude poison will be active and doing damage. And so when that falls off, the other ones might step up to the plate and be the only active poison. But you can increase that obviously by allowing it to have more than one poison at a time. You can add in overwhelming toxicity to get to 2 poisons. You can add in attacking toxins to get to 3 poisons. You can add in the rebuilding toxins to get to 4 poisons, and all of those will coincide and have their own damage and scale off the damage that you're dealing as well, which means that all of that extra poison damage you're doing is going to start being worth more and more. Then you pick up magnitude and you pick up here. Personally, for me, I would probably then for 3rd and 4th Ascendancy just go down to skill speed here just to pick this up. I think this is, skill speed is actually massive for the toxic burst, but it depends on the toxic growth and how it functions in endgame, and if you're still able to do your flippy dippy circus flips while you're trying to survive in endgame Atlas maps, but you'll have to figure that out for yourself. And lastly, when it comes to gearing, you just want as much raw physical power on the ability on the weapon that you possibly can. Then add in attack speed, crit chance, and crit damage. You can get crit chance and crit damage plus damage with bow skills on the quiver, and an added bonus as well. So if you wanted to, you could put fire damage on the quiver, which will detonate these gases. So if you're able to trigger an ignite, which will trigger in some cases a detonate, you'll be able to get these gases to blow up, which does even more damage. And since you're applying so much poison and gas everywhere anyways, you'll still just get a nice combo there, and it'll just be like a closed loop of you dealing damage that way.
If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.